A single shot cracks through the quiet afternoon, a loud, sharp sound that cuts through the air. Mariah Rosanna Samuels, caught completely off guard, stumbles back. Then another shot, and another. One after another, the bullets rip through her body. The street, once peaceful, is filled with the sound of violence, of her screams, of her desperate attempt to escape. But it's all in vain. Mariah, a mother of two, a woman with dreams of a future that will never be, is struck 10 times, each shot taking a piece of her until the last one ends her life. Onlookers freeze, paralyzed with disbelief, as the man who once claimed to love her, her ex, David Wright, vanishes into the chaos. In her final moments, Mariah fought to survive. She tried to call for help, to hold on, but there was no time left. The man who had stalked her, ignored court orders, and filled her life with fear, has now taken it all. What started as a day like any other in Minneapolis has turned into the horrifying end of a woman's life and the beginning of an investigation that will uncover a chilling truth, a truth that no one saw coming. In the days following her death, protests erupted across Minneapolis. Community members, friends, and advocates took to the streets, demanding justice for Mariah and calling for stronger protections against domestic violence. Signs reading, "Protect women, demand justice," and "No more violence" filled the streets as the city voiced its outrage and grief. If a voice like Mariah's can be silenced in an instant, then no one is safe. Subscribe now to uncover the hidden truths behind this tragic case.
Mariah Rosanna Samuels was more than just a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a best friend, and above all, a mother. To her 2 young children, she was their world, a woman who dedicated every moment of her life to their happiness, their well-being. A woman who had dreams of watching them grow, of seeing them live out their own stories. But those dreams would be shattered on that fateful afternoon in September. Born and raised in Minneapolis, Mariah always had a love for animals, which led her to a career as a dog groomer. It wasn't just a job for her, it was her passion. She would spend hours making sure every dog she worked with looked its best, giving them the love and care they deserved. She wasn't just doing it for the paycheck, she was doing it for the joy it brought her. Her clients adored her, and her reputation as a kind-hearted, hard-working woman spread through the community. But for all the joy she brought to others, Mariah's personal life was far from perfect. Behind closed doors, she faced the kind of turmoil that no one should ever endure. She had once been in love with a man who would become her worst nightmare, David Eugene Wright, a man who had once promised to love her, but instead filled her life with fear, control, and violence. Her relationship with Wright began like any other. There were moments of joy, shared laughs, and promises of a future together. But as time passed, things began to change. Wright became possessive, controlling, and ultimately violent. The first time he raised his hand to her, Mariah knew something had to change. She tried to leave, but he wouldn't let her go. His jealousy and anger consumed him, and for a while it consumed her too. Despite the toxic and abusive relationship, Mariah held on to the hope that things would improve. She tried to forgive, she tried to rebuild. But over time, she realized there was no escaping the grip of his rage. And so, in a desperate attempt to protect herself and her children, she finally took the step of filing for a protection order. But even that, she would soon learn, was not enough to keep her safe. "When I got the protection order, I thought it would be the end of it," Mariah had told a friend not long before her death. "But it feels like I'm still trapped in his world. I don't know what's going to happen next. I just want peace. I want my life back," she said, trying to move forward, but finding it difficult to escape the cycle of violence that kept pulling her back into his orbit. But in the end, it wasn't enough to save her.
David Eugene Wright was no stranger to violence. His criminal record stretched back years, showing a history of aggressive behavior and prior encounters with the law. For Mariah, he became more than just an ex-boyfriend. He was a man whose control over her life grew suffocating. Wright's relationship with Mariah initially appeared normal, but over time he became possessive and controlling. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing at every moment. This escalating behavior created fear and tension in Mariah's life. In 2025, after repeated harassment, Mariah made the difficult decision to file for a protection order. Despite the legal documents, Wright's obsession with her persisted. He continued to threaten her and showed up uninvited at her home, fueling her fear. In the days leading up to the shooting, Mariah expressed her frustration and fear on social media. She wrote about how the protection order felt ineffective and her ongoing concerns for her safety. These posts serve as a stark reminder that she was doing everything she could to protect herself while living under constant threat. Those close to Mariah observed that she was living in constant concern for her safety. Wright's behavior had transformed him into a source of terror, making her feel trapped despite her efforts to break free. Tragically, the escalation of his obsession culminated in the fatal shooting.
It was a normal September afternoon in Minneapolis, the sun casting a warm glow over the streets as Mariah Rosanna Samuels stepped outside her home. She had shared on social media earlier that day her frustration with the ineffectiveness of the protection order and her concerns about her safety. She had no way of knowing that within moments, the man who had stalked her for months, Eugene Wright, was waiting outside. Wright, consumed by obsession and anger, had been watching her movements for weeks. The protection order she had obtained did little to deter him. In his mind, he would not let her go, and he had already decided to take matters into his own hands. Mariah's calm afternoon turned to chaos in an instant. Wright had positioned himself outside her home, waiting for the right moment. As soon as she stepped out, he acted. The tension was palpable, and the fear she had carried for months tightened its grip around her chest. In the span of seconds, Wright pulled out a firearm. The first shot rang out, echoing through the quiet street. Mariah gasped as the pain hit, trying to move, to escape, but multiple shots struck her, 10 in total, each one fatal. She staggered and collapsed onto the pavement, her body lifeless. Neighbors reacted in horror. Some ran to their windows calling 911, while others froze in disbelief. The street became a chaotic scene filled with panic and the sound of approaching sirens. Wright did not flee immediately. Witnesses saw him leaving the area, but the shock and confusion slowed any immediate pursuit. He disappeared into the streets, leaving Mariah on the ground, the echoes of violence lingering in the neighborhood. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but it was too late. Mariah, a woman who had fought so hard to protect herself, was gone. 10 shots had stolen her life, ending her future and leaving her children and community devastated.
As the news of Mariah's death spread, the quiet street where she lived became the scene of a frantic investigation. Police arrived shortly after the 911 call, their sirens echoing through the neighborhood. The area around Mariah's home was quickly cordoned off. Forensic teams moved in, searching for any evidence that could help identify her killer. Witnesses were questioned, but information was limited. No one had seen the shooting in full. A fleeting glimpse of a man leaving the area on a bicycle was reported, providing investigators with a starting point for their search. Authorities focused on Eugene Wright, a man already known to Mariah and linked to her prior harassment and stalking. Wright had a documented history of violence and had repeatedly violated the protection order she had obtained. Investigators reviewed security cameras from nearby homes, showing Wright in the vicinity of Mariah's residence shortly before the shooting. Combined with reports of the figure on a bicycle, the evidence began to form a clearer picture. Physical evidence played a key role. Law enforcement recovered a spent cartridge casing near the scene. Ballistics testing later confirmed the firearm used was associated with Wright, providing a critical link between him and the crime. The investigation also examined digital records. While specific messages or texts cannot be verified, authorities confirmed that Wright had prior documented harassment toward Mariah, demonstrating a pattern of obsessive behavior. Later that evening, officers located Wright at his residence. He was taken into custody without incident.
While details of his statements remain limited, his arrest marked a major step forward in the investigation and offered a measure of relief to Mariah's grieving family. The arrest of David Wright did not erase the trauma or the loss. Questions remained about the effectiveness of protective measures and how someone with a history of harassment was able to carry out such a tragic act. Mariah's death highlighted systemic failures and the urgent need for reforms to protect victims of abuse. What makes someone like David Wright snap? What could have been done to stop this tragedy? Comment below and let us know your thoughts on this disturbing case.
As investigators delved deeper into David Wright's life, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of behavior, one that spanned years and showed a tendency toward aggression and harassment. Wright had a documented history with the law, and authorities needed to understand why he had targeted Mariah and how the situation escalated to murder. Wright's early life was marked by instability. Reports indicate he had multiple run-ins with the law, ranging from minor offenses to more serious crimes, including convictions for aggravated robbery and illegal weapon possession. His past suggested a pattern of violent behavior and difficulty maintaining lawful conduct. Despite his criminal record, Wright continued to struggle with controlling behavior and anger. Those close to Mariah reported that he frequently harassed and threatened her. Even with a protection order in place, his actions escalated over time, creating a climate of fear and intimidation. Wright's relationship with Mariah deteriorated as he increasingly sought to control her actions and movements. Friends and family observed that his behavior was obsessive and possessive. He repeatedly violated boundaries, demonstrating that he could not accept Mariah asserting her independence. Authorities determined that Wright's need for control over Mariah, combined with his history of violent behavior, directly contributed to the tragic events that unfolded. While the precise motives behind his actions cannot be fully known, investigators confirmed a consistent pattern of harassment and escalating aggression leading up to the shooting. This case illustrates how patterns of abusive behavior, if unaddressed, can escalate to deadly violence. Wright's past, filled with documented aggression, manipulation, and threats, created a situation where tragedy became inevitable. The fatal outcome was the result of a long history of unchecked behavior and a system that struggled to keep Mariah safe. When the news of Mariah's death reached her family, the shock was like a punch to the gut. Mariah had been taken in the blink of an eye, and no one was prepared for the suddenness of the loss. Her mother, Janet, was the first to receive the call. At first, she didn't believe it. She had just spoken to Mariah the night before. How could she be gone now? But when the truth set in, it shattered her. "She was my baby," Janet said in a quiet interview. "I raised her, I loved her, and now I can't even hold her. I can't even say goodbye. It's like a part of me has been ripped out, and I'll never get that part back." Mariah's 2 children were left facing a reality no child should have to endure. The mother who had been their world, who had nurtured and cared for them every day, was suddenly gone. The grief was overwhelming, raw, and unending. The future that once seemed so bright now lay in tatters for them. For her 2 children, the trauma of losing their mother in such a violent way was unimaginable. No child should ever have to experience such horror, and the emotional toll would linger for years to come. The community, too, felt the weight of Mariah's loss. She was well known for her work as a dog groomer and her involvement in local events. To her neighbors and clients, she wasn't just a face behind a business. She was a kind soul who had brought joy and warmth to their lives. The shock of her murder spread quickly, leaving everyone who knew her questioning how someone so good could be taken in such a senseless act. At her memorial, hundreds gathered to pay their respects. The service was filled with tributes to her kindness, her generosity, and her unwavering love for her children. Amid the sorrow, there was also anger that her life had been cut short by someone who should never have been allowed to hurt her. "She was one of the good ones," a longtime client said, her voice shaking. "She always made us feel like we mattered, and now we're all left to pick up the pieces without her." The grief was shared by everyone, from family and friends to the community she had touched with her presence. The aftermath of Mariah's death wasn't just felt by her immediate family. It reverberated through the entire community, sparking conversations about domestic violence, protection orders, and the failures in the system to keep women safe.
How could a man with such a violent history continue to threaten her? How could she still be left vulnerable despite taking all the steps to protect herself? Her death raised urgent questions about how society protects victims of abuse, how authorities handle individuals with a known pattern of violence, and what more can be done to prevent domestic violence from ending in tragedy. In the wake of her passing, advocates called for change, stronger support systems, stricter enforcement, and better protection to ensure that no one else would suffer the same fate.
As authorities continued their investigation into Mariah's murder, attention turned toward the legal process. David Eugene Wright was in custody, and prosecutors began preparing their case. Mariah's family followed developments closely, hoping that the justice system would hold the man responsible for her death accountable. Wright's arrest prompted discussions about the charges he would face. Prosecutors were expected to focus on his history of harassment, violations of the protection order, and the fatal shooting that claimed Mariah's life. The evidence collected, including witness statements, physical evidence from the scene, and prior records of Wright's aggressive behavior, formed the backbone of the case against him. Although no trial had taken place, the community was already watching closely. Friends, neighbors, and advocates emphasized the need for a careful but thorough legal process. They wanted the truth to be fully revealed and for the system to respond to the patterns of abuse that had preceded Mariah's death. Legal experts noted that the case would be complex. They expected prosecutors to argue for the seriousness of his repeated harassment and threats, while Wright's defense team could attempt to explore his past and psychological state. What was clear to everyone was that the outcome of this trial would be closely scrutinized, not just by Mariah's family, but by the wider community concerned about domestic violence and protection orders. Mariah's family, meanwhile, focused on supporting each other and protecting her children. They hoped that the judicial process would serve as both a measure of justice and a statement about the consequences of abuse and obsession. While the courtroom proceedings had not yet begun, the anticipation and tension were palpable. The story of Mariah Rosanna Samuels had already highlighted critical issues: the failure of protective measures, the dangers of escalating abuse, and the need for accountability when someone's life is threatened. The nation watched and waited for the trial to begin, knowing that the outcome would be a pivotal chapter in this tragic story. The trial may be over, but the fight for justice continues. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed about the latest updates on this case and others like it. Mariah Rosanna Samuels' death is a tragic reminder of the deep scars left by domestic violence. She was a mother and a friend, someone who had dreams and aspirations just like anyone else. But those dreams were stolen in a moment of violence, a moment that could have been prevented. Mariah did everything she could to protect herself. She filed for a protection order and sought help, yet she still became a victim of the violence she was trying to escape. Her case highlights the severe flaws in the systems meant to protect people like her. And it forces us to ask, why did it take the ultimate tragedy to bring attention to this issue? Her story is a painful reminder that protection orders and existing support systems are not always enough. Legal systems and social services must evolve to better address the needs of those trying to break free from abusive relationships. Mariah's death cannot be in vain. It must fuel the movement for stronger protections, better enforcement, and more comprehensive support for survivors of domestic violence. Mariah's life was cut short, but her legacy lives on through her children, her family, her friends, and the fight for change that her story now represents. She was more than just a victim. She was a symbol of hope for those trapped in abusive relationships. And though she is gone, the questions she leaves behind demand answers. The world must learn from Mariah's tragedy. The systems must change, because no one should have to live in fear, and no one should die at the hands of someone who was supposed to care for them. Her story calls for action, awareness, and a commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future.